Hey friends, welcome back to Fantasy Wash. It's been a little while since I've done a book review and I have just been reading the Red Rising series, and since I started book 4, which is Iron Gold, I figured I would do a book review about this. I have a lot to say about this book. It is predominantly going to be a spoiler-filled chat, but the first little bit I'm going to do non-spoiler. I'll put markers in the video down below in case you don't want to see spoilers so you'll know when to stop, or if you want to just get to the spoilers, you can skip ahead. Let's jump in. So Iron Gold is book 4 in the Red Rising Saga by Pierce Brown. The first 3 books are considered a trilogy and the 4 latter books are a quartet. All of them take place in the same world, however, there is a monumental shift in terms of time and perspective between the first 3 books and book 4. Our first 3 books deal with Darrow. It is a single POV story. At the beginning of the first book, Darrow is 16 years old, and at the end of the third book, he's around 24, 25. And in book 4, we jump ahead 10 years. Now, Darrow is not the only POV we have for this book. We shift from single POV to multi-POV, and it is a 4 POV book. I thought this was interesting. I'm going to talk more about the POVs as a whole once I get to the spoiler section, but one of the things I was excited about for reading this book was getting to see what the ramifications of war look like. Book 3 ends on a relatively high note for the majority of the characters, even though you know there is going to be fallout from everything that has just happened. There's been an ongoing war, there is a class war, people at the lower stratas of society are desperately seeking to break out from those chains and be regarded as people, because in the society they are ranked according to color, golds being at the very top, reds being at the very bottom. Darrow is a unique person to be in a role of leadership in that he was born a red but was transformed into a gold. He's become the face of this war for those that are leading the opposition to the gold. So I really loved the first 3 books. Each of them had a different feel because Darrow is a different age in each of the books, and in this book, when we get reacquainted with him, it felt very awkward. Now, the reason I say that is because I felt like we got to know Darrow pretty intimately in the first 3 books, being that it is a single POV novel, and then to jump into this where we're not only getting Darrow's perspective, that in and of itself threw me just a little bit at the beginning, but it felt like the Darrow that we had come to know in the first 3 books isn't necessarily present here. And that's something I'm going to be talking quite a bit about in the spoiler section, because I found that of our familiar characters from the first 3 books, many of them did not feel like they're themselves. And that's not to say that, oh, well, yes, 10 years have passed, they shouldn't necessarily feel like themselves. It went beyond that for me. It was that the core fundamentals of what made these characters who they are felt changed and or hollow. So I'm not sure why Pierce did that to me in this book, but we're gonna get further into that in a couple of minutes. In terms of settings and world buildings, I feel like we get an okay amount of that in this book. The settings are pretty similar in that we are on Luna, we hear about Earth, we hear little bits about Mars, and we get more of an introduction to Venus than we did in the previous 3 books. So I liked that from that perspective. But the book, even though it is the beginning of a new string of stories, really is a continuation of the 3rd book, in that we are fighting the same group of people. We're still in that same class struggle. So I think it was important that Pierce established the fact that even though 10 years have passed, it hasn't been as fruitful and successful as perhaps the rebellion was hoping it would be. So that's pretty much all I have to say about non-spoilers, because there is a lot to unpack in this novel, and I'm gonna start talking about spoilers now. So this book and I, we struggled quite a bit. And that's not to say that I think it is a poorly written novel. I definitely don't think that. In terms of the writing, the language, the structure, I think that Pierce actually did a very great job in this book. For me, the bigger issues came with the characters themselves. Now, the single POV I really like. I like a first-person POV in my stories, so naturally I really gravitated towards Darrow in those first 3 books. But in this one, even though it is still first-person POV, the only POV other than Darrow that I was interested in for probably the first 2/3 of the book was Lysander. Lyria's POV offered me nothing. I did not connect to her character at all. As a matter of fact, I found her quite annoying and cumbersome. I understand what Pierce was trying to do, and that he's trying to show the fact that even though Darrow thinks he's being successful in many of the things that he's done for the lower classes of people, that necessarily hasn't come into effect. And we see that through Lyria's character. And it's interesting in one perspective that we are seeing a Red who is a Gamma, because the Gammas were viewed as the more privileged Reds from Darrow's perspective in book 1. But I just felt like this was too much of a callback to book 1. We really needed to start separating ourselves and creating a new space for new voices, if that's what he was going for. And Lyria is a younger person. She's 18, I believe, at the beginning of this. So there is a dichotomy in terms of, and discrepancy in terms of the ages of the majority of these POVs, because Ephraim is around the age of Darrow. Lysander is, of course, a bit younger. He's about 22 when this book takes place. And then Lyria is 18. I would have very much preferred, if he wanted to have that juxtaposition between an older and a younger POV, that maybe he would have utilized Pax or Electra. I feel like specifically Electra would have been so fascinating, because the brief little bits of Electra that we get in the book are very indicative of the fact that she is a carbon copy of her parents. And that's not to say that she doesn't have her own little personality mixed into that, but she is the byproduct of Victor and Severo. And I really love that and respect that about the character. And I just feel like that would have been a more interesting dynamic, because it not only connects us to the original characters that we love so much, but it really does give us that insight look on how these characters are coping with the absence of their fathers, how they are coping with their mother's involvement in the political sphere, how it is to be raised as children without color, even though they are still in a position of privilege. I just feel like it would have been a much more interesting perspective for me personally. I really did struggle with that aspect of the book. Now, if we're going to talk about the characters as a whole and get really specific with them, Darrow, to me, just did not feel like he had matured or learned anything from the first 3 books, which I really found to be a slap in the face to all of the character development that we had for Darrow in the first 3 books. Darrow starts as a somewhat naive boy, and that's due to his circumstance and the fact that he's born a low Red. He's not offered an education. He does not live in a life of any element of privilege. But when he is taken from that world and he is transformed by Mickey into this gold, we know that Darrow is special because of the fact that he is able to withstand being transformed. And we know that he's intelligent because he only misses 1 question on the examination to get into the academy. Darrow is a revolutionary figure. We see this in book 1 when he storms Mount Olympus. He is unlike anything the Golds have ever seen, and he is special. And I just found that Darrow over the first 3 books isn't perfect. None of these characters are perfect, and that's one of the things that I really like that Pierce Brown does, is that he's not trying to give us a messianic type figure in that everything Darrow does is good, is well regarded by the general populace, and is straightforward. It's often quite muddied and is difficult. And Darrow struggled with making those decisions in the first 3 books. And I understand that we are looking at this from a lens of someone that has been hardened over the last 10 years, but it just felt like in terms of intelligence, Darrow went backwards. It's not even that he's stagnated. It's that he's gone back to a form even before he was 16. It didn't make sense for so many of the decisions that he decided to make. And it wasn't only Darrow that I found this about. I really struggled with Mustang in addition to Darrow. And part of that is that we didn't have, I feel, a proper establishment of where their relationship stood in the beginning of this book. The end of Morningstar, we see that Mustang has really kept this massive secret from Darrow. He had a son while she thought he was dead, when in reality he was in prison. And she kept Pax from him for an extended period of time. I forgave her for this because I understood her motives as to why she did this. But the beginning of Iron Gold has Darrow lamenting over the fact that he hasn't been with Virginia or Pax in a really long time. And he's really looking forward to being back with them. And then when he gets back to Luna, they kind of fall back into their symbiotic relationship. Everything's feeling good between the 2 of them. It's cohesive, it's functional. It seems like a partnership that really works. And very soon after, when Darrow has to deal with the ramifications of him going against the Senate and going against what so many people advised him to do. Virginia initially seems like she's on his side and then flips that and is going to arrest him. This does not add up to the Mustang character at all. Mustang in the first 3 books is exceedingly intelligent. She's highly calculated and is a character that has plans within plans within plans. It is one of the things that I love so much about the original 3 books, in that Pierce Brown knew how to write good female characters. Victra and Mustang are 2 of the standouts from the original 3 books. And in this book, I feel that both of them suffered greatly. Neither one of them was given the reverence that their characters had earned after the first 3 books and the emotional journey that they had each gone on. Mustang feels like she is just tired, and there's not context given to why she is making the decisions that she's making, and she feels like a shell of herself and almost like a passive player in this story. I just found it so difficult to believe that that was the same character from the first 3 books. And again, I know people are going to argue 10 years is a long period of time. People change, people evolve. Sure, I get that. But this did not feel like an evolution. It felt like a regression in so many ways. And if we want to look at Victra in addition to Mustang, Victra at the beginning of the book is clearly flummoxed and frustrated at the way that Mustang is leading a lot of the time. She has been without her husband for a significant period of time, and when Darrow and Severo are going to leave again, Victra even makes a point of saying to Darrow that she wishes Severo would stay. She's been parted from her husband for a good chunk of these last 10 years. They now have multiple children. She's currently pregnant, but Victra is frustrated, and I get that she's frustrated because I would be frustrated with that too. But some of the actions of Victra, specifically at the end of the book, where she goes against all logic and reason and goes after Lyria, even though she knows that Lyria isn't responsible for the kidnapping of Electra and Pax, was not something at all that the Victra we had come to know would do. Victra is a character who is inherently bitter and views herself as better than the majority of the people around her. And let's be real, she is, because Victra is just the GOAT. But this Victra just felt like she threw all caution to the wind. She wasn't meticulous. She didn't have forethought. And the way that I kind of view the relationships between Virginia and Victra and Severo and Darrow is that they kind of mirror each other, in that Mustang and Darrow are supposed to be the faces, the leaders, whereas Severo and Victra are the people who put plans into action. And it just felt like there was no real communication between Mustang and Victra in this, and that Victra kind of just went off on her own weird thing and did something incredibly stupid. This did not feel like the Victra that I know and love. So I struggled deeply with how these 3 characters were presented in this book. Now, if we want to talk about some of the new characters, even though Lysander isn't new, his POV is new, and for the first 2/3 of the book, Lysander was my favorite POV. I really enjoyed seeing his dynamic with Cassius. I love Cassius in terms of characters from the first book. The male characters, Severo is my sweet baby favorite. I love Severo very, very much, but I really adored Cassius and Roque. I really liked the dynamic that they offered to Darrow, and Cassius is just a very complex character, and I loved seeing how he had kind of fallen into a parental figure with Lysander, but also that of an educator. It's blurred lines between the 2 of them. And Lysander is a character who is really struggling with his identity because of the fact that he was born into this position of extreme privilege, but yet has been essentially a refugee for the last 10 years, and that Darrow killed his grandmother and his family is all gone. Really, the only person he has left in this world, or the worlds, is Cassius. And the beginning of the book, it made sense as to where the relationship stood between Lysander and Cassius. Lysander really never gets super on board with everything that Cassius is teaching him. Lysander just doesn't understand it. He doesn't understand Darrow's perspective. And when it got to the point in the book in which Cassius is supposedly dead, which I do not buy for a second, which is another issue I have with this book, because I do not love a resurrection trope. I just don't. So that for me was problematic, not only due to the fact that Lysander and Cassius really only have each other, and then Cassius supposedly dies, and Lysander is kind of Loki from that meme. Well, it's like, well, moving on then, he kind of just has like a momentary blip of grief and then very quickly moves on to doing the exact opposite of everything Cassius told him to do. None of this felt natural. I found like it felt very forced. His relationship with Seraphina, I understand. He's someone that really hasn't had much interaction with the opposite sex. He's not someone that has maybe had relationships before. And Seraphina to him is very interesting. She's alluring. So that can be one aspect of it. But I just didn't feel like the decisions made sense for Lysander in the last third of the book. What really carried me through for the last chunk of Lysander's story was Romulus. Romulus was a character that I loved in Morningstar. The conversation between Roke, him, and Darrow is one of my favorites ever. I really loved that scene. And in terms of how Pierce has created this dynamic in this world, that it is very much it's influenced by Greco-Roman history. The original story was influenced by the Greek tragedy Antigone. And of course, he has incorporated many aspects of Roman history, Roman life, Roman religion into this world as well. And in terms of looking at militaristic ideologies and Roman ideologies, Romulus, not just for his name, but for his character, is so emblematic of that. And really, I loved how he characterized Romulus, especially in this book. The idea of dying on one's sword is the Roman way to die, and Romulus really is that character, is that figure, and I just really loved his plotline in this book. Also simultaneously devastated because I really loved him as a character, and I would have liked to see him in future books. I feel like he could have offered a lot to the story, but Lysander's arc for me was very frustrating. I think frustrating is just the best way to put it. Now, if we want to look at our two new POVs, of course we have Lyria and we have Ephraim. Lyria, I kind of talked about briefly, and that I didn't like her character at all. I also listened to this in audiobook format, and the woman that was voicing Lyria was horrendous. Like, I am not normally someone who will get on and bash a book or bash a narrator or anything like that, but really, I don't know why they thought this was a good choice, because it was grating to listen to, especially when all of the other voices were fine. Lyria's voice, though, was just so irritating that it wasn't only that really took me out of the story, but just the content for her wasn't interesting. And the fact was that other than getting Cavix, which I did enjoy because I love the Telematises, like I love them so much, we don't get enough of them, I feel like, to really warrant the amount of Lyria that we get in this book. And I understand that Pierce brings her in. I felt almost like as a plot convenience to get Ephraim and her connected so that Ephraim could get to the kids. I just feel like there could have been a less roundabout way of doing that, and we could have still had the same effect and the same result, in that the children are kidnapped at the end by Ephraim. But Ephraim, for me, became my favorite POV at the end of the book. I felt like the last third really was where he shined. And I feel like in terms of character work and characterization, Ephraim was very well done. He is a raw and visceral character, and he's one that is in a perpetual state of mourning. And I found that if we are really looking at the cost of war and what that looks like for people, Ephraim is a very good example. Even though Lyria's family is killed in this book, I didn't care. I just could not connect to her and did not find her relatable. I found her to be just tedious most of the time. Whereas with Ephraim, him lamenting his relationship with his fiance, his connection to Holiday, his just desperation, that felt much more real, natural, and I felt like it fit better into the overall plot, the overall world. It was also an interesting throwback that Ephraim, of course, was a character that was mentioned not by name in the first 3 books, but was mentioned in the sense that he was the fiance. So I really loved that connection, and I felt like that was a strong enough connection for me just to make it seem interesting. But Ephraim as a whole, I really liked his dynamic with Electra and Pax at the end of the book. I thought that was super fascinating. His interactions with the Duke of Hands was very well done. And his relationship with Holiday, I really enjoyed, just because both of them lost the same person, but what that person meant to them is inherently different. Holiday lost her brother, and Ephraim lost his love. So I liked seeing that dynamic and seeing the differences as to how that loss has impacted each of them. Obviously, one has made substantially better life choices than the other, but all in all, it just was, I think it was well done. However, the character that really stole the show for me in this book, and the character that I enjoyed the most in this book, was Apollonius. And this was not only due to the fact that I thought his character was exceedingly funny, but I enjoyed the dynamic of getting to know him. I loved Tactus in the first few books. I really enjoyed seeing why Tactus is the way that he is. We knew that in the original series, Tactus was the least harmful of his three brothers. We see that in this book. Apollonius is insane, and it's so interesting and fun to read of a character that is just unhinged, which he really is. And his dynamic of not really being truthful but being loyal is one that I really enjoyed. I gravitated towards that. But the end where Darrow leaves him with unfulfilled promise is just so frustrating, because Apollonius is not a character that you want to screw with, and Darrow just making stupid decisions goes, I need these people more than you do, peace, and leaves. And it was those types of things that really stuck out with me in a negative way in terms of this book. I really did struggle with a lot of the decisions that Darrow made in regards to the other characters. In terms of my enjoyment of this book, initially I gave it a 4 stars on Goodreads. I'm probably leaning more towards a 3.5. Now that I've reflected on it, I'll still leave it as a 4 stars just because rounded up. I feel like the writing in this book, like I said, was very well done. I think if you look at the language, the descriptors that are being used in regards to book 1 compared to this one, this is very much an improvement. I am probably one of the few people that really loves book 1 as it is. Like, I don't feel like it needs to be changed a whole lot. I know that a lot of people just think it is the worst book of the series, and to me, that's not the case. Iron Gold is significantly lower than Red Rising. I ended up talking to my friend Tori from Tori Talks. She will probably have her vlog out by this point in regards to this book, because we ended up kind of unintentionally buddy reading it and sending each other notes. It was fun to have someone to kind of bounce ideas off of and have similar feelings with. She and I had a very similar reading experience to this book in that we both finished. Tori has read the original 3 books many, many times, but we both reread, and she reread and I read for the first time last month. So these books were very much on the forefront of our minds and were present, and we were very much already immersed in the world, the settings, the characters. So jumping into this book didn't feel like too much of a hardship in trying to refamiliarize myself with who people were, what places were, what technology we're using. Even though that information was there and was present, the world felt so different, and because the characters felt so different. And I wish that there would have been more time given to establish the relationship, the dynamic between the core characters that we knew from the original trilogy in this book before we were really thrust into the madness and everything unfolding. I feel like this book really needed more time at the beginning, and had we been further cemented into how the relationships worked at this point, I maybe would have felt a little bit differently, but I really did struggle with a lot of the decisions that the characters made. I still want to say that I enjoyed this book, even though I struggled with aspects of it very much. I've already started the 5th book, Dark Age. I am curious to see how I feel about that. The way that the POVs are working in that book is once again different. I think that I'm liking it better on that front, but I'm curious to see how I feel. So far, not as in love with this as I am with the original trilogy. I've been told that Dark Age and Lightbringer are god tier books for a lot of people. I'm hoping that I feel that way when I get to the end of them. Let me know in the comments down below if you have read Iron Gold, what your thoughts about it were. Please do not leave any spoilers for books 5 and 6 because I have not read them yet. I'm in the process of reading them. I'm hoping to read them by the end of the month. If you are someone that enjoys the audiobooks, just so you know, they are available on Audible for free until May 31st. So get in and listen to them if you want to at that time. If you would like to follow me on Instagram, Goodreads, and all that fun stuff, and come hang out in Discord, all that information is in the box down below. I don't normally do videos like this. Let me know if this is something you enjoyed, if you would like bigger deep dives, breakdowns of the books that I read. This one really stuck out for me just because of the fact that I did have quite visceral reactions to a lot of the moments in this book. It didn't have any groundbreaking scenes like Morningstar did for me. Morningstar had several scenes that like made me pause and put the book down just to really absorb what I was listening to and what I was reading, because they were just so monumental for the characters, and I really didn't feel like we had anything like that in this book. So I'm hoping we get more of that perhaps going forward in book 5 and book 6. But let me know if you like these types of videos. Like I said, please like and subscribe. It's the best way to help and support the channel. And as always, I'll see you next time. Bye.